As the weather cools in central Florida, anglers eagerly await the arrival of schools of a certain silvery fish that eats flies, fights hard, and often jumps clear of the water when trying to escape. No, it's not tarpon. Those won't show up for another few months. The fish I'm referring to is the American shad. If you hit the run right, these fish are incredibly abundant, easy to locate, and often very easy to catch. All you need is a 5-weight fly rod, a handful of flies, and a way to get out on the water. The American shad, along with its cousin the hickory shad, migrates up the St. Johns River every fall. Like salmon and steelhead, these fish are anadromous. After spending their adult lives in saltwater, they return to the rivers and streams where they hatched in order to spawn. American shad in Florida reach a little over 5 pounds. Hickory shad reach about half that size. The scientific name for American shad is Alosa sapidissima, which translates as most delicious shad. The hickory shad is Alosa mediocris, which sounds a little less appetizing. American and hickory shad look very similar and can be difficult to distinguish.
The American shad mouth comes together almost perfectly symmetrical, just like that. Imagine these two fingers, the thumb and finger, coming together. However, on the hickory shad, it's more of an undercut or underbite on the lower jaw of the hickory shad. What I always like to say is, even though you're fishing for American shad, it's okay to catch a hickory shad.
Shad fishing in the U.S. has a long history, predating the arrival of the first Europeans. The Florida American shad run supported a large commercial fishery well into the 20th century. Though extremely bony, the American shad is very good to eat, and the females provide caviar, which is considered a delicacy. Recreational angling, both for food and for fun, also has a place in Florida history. Well before commercial air travel in the interstate highway system, anglers from the north would take the train down to enjoy Florida's warm winter and abundant shad run. American shad are native to East Coast rivers from Florida north. They have been introduced to rivers on the west coast of the United States as well. The Central Florida run, up the St. Johns, is the southernmost run on the East Coast. Flowing 310 miles from Blue Cypress Lake north to Jacksonville, the St. Johns is the longest river in Florida. With an average drop of only an inch a mile, the river often resembles a series of interconnecting lakes more than a typical river. The original Timucuan name for the St. Johns, Wakaiva, actually translates as River of Lakes. In most of the country, shad wait for coastal rivers to warm in the spring before migrating upstream. In Florida, it's the other way around. As the weather cools in the winter, conditions become more favorable for the shad migration. By November, the St. Johns has typically cooled down enough to welcome the first of the shad. Fly fishing gear for shad doesn't need to be complicated. If you have a 5 or 6 weight setup for trout or panfish, that will work fine. If you do any spay fishing, the St. Johns, during the shad run, is arguably the best place in Florida to swing a fly with a 2-handed rod. Flies for shad tend to be pretty basic. A variety of patterns and colors on a number 4 to number 8 hook will work. Most of our local patterns have some weight to get them down on the water column. A sink tip line or sinking versaleader is sometimes used as well to get the fly to the right depth. Most of the time, the shad aren't picky and will eat a variety of flies. There are times, however, when they are selectively feeding on something specific. Usually it's small baitfish or shrimp. For this reason, it's a good idea to have a few small minnow and shrimp patterns in your box. When the shad enter the river in November or December, we are just coming off our rainy season, and ideally, the river will be in flood stage with the banks underwater. This allows the gambusia, or mosquito fish, ghost shrimp, and other forage species that live in the river to move onto the wide floodplain where they can eat their fill and reproduce. As the water recedes, the river will drop back into its banks, and the gambusia and shrimp will get squeegeed off the floodplain into the river proper. The river becomes a moving conveyor belt of food, with fish of every species, including American shad, lining up to take full advantage of the situation. During a dry year, the river may never get out of its banks. The shad will still come, but food will not be as plentiful, and fish will be in different parts of the river. Where the fish will be, and where we can easily fish for them, is largely dependent on how much water is moving through the river. It helps to keep up not only with the temperature, but with the river level. The U.S. Geological Survey maintains a series of gauges along the river's course that will let you check conditions before hitting the water. Unless you're able to fish several times a week, keeping up with the run on your own can be difficult. Fortunately, shad anglers are usually pretty friendly, and we all have the same goal of keeping track of the run as it progresses. This is a lot easier to do when people share information. And share we do. Finding out where the fish are is often as simple as talking to other anglers or stopping by a local shop like Orlando Outfitters. Once you're out fishing, you need to be able to locate fish in that general area. If you have a shallow draft boat, then you'll be able to move around to find the fish. Running the St. Johns can be a bit tricky. If the water's in the banks and you're good at reading water, the channel is pretty obvious in most areas. If you're going far, it helps to have a GPS as well as a smartphone with Google Maps or another satellite image app available. You will probably need it. Just make sure the image you are using shows the river below flood stage. Even with GPS and satellite images, you will make mistakes. Fortunately, the bottom is sand and mud and is relatively easy on boats and motors. Just go slow, take your time, and be ready to get out and push if the need arises. As you run the river, the first thing to look for is feeding fish. If you see fish feeding at the surface, stop and fish. It may be panfish, but sometimes there are shad mixed in. Also, look for terns diving down to pick shrimp and bait fish up off the surface. Even if you don't see fish, it's worth a few casts. You already know there's bait, and there may well be fish down below. Pay attention to the type of surface activity you see. Most of us who shad fish have been misled by what looks like fish feeding, but is actually just fish rolling to gulp air. Often it's hoplo catfish, an invasive species recently arrived from South America that will make you think something is going on when it's not. Their rolls are very splashy and pretty obvious once you know what you're looking at. Sometimes you find obvious signs of fish, sometimes you don't. Once you decide on an area to fish, you'll need to figure out how to fish it. One of the best scenarios is fishing an outside bend where the current is pushing up against a cut bank. The current will push bait right up to the shore, making this a great ambush spot for many species, including shad. You won't need to cast far to catch fish. Sometimes a roll cast is all that is needed. Standing on a shoreline with current along it, a typical cast will be straight out or quartering downstream. If the fish are on top, I might start stripping right away, or just hold the line tight. Often, it's better to throw a couple mends to get some slack in the line and let the fly sink a little before starting to strip. I like to start off with short, slow, even strips, with a pause in between. You may have to change it up. Sometimes they want fast strips, other times you'll catch more fish with a fly just hanging in the current. There are times when shad are moving through, and you can stand in one spot and catch fish. Then it will slow down, and 20 minutes later more fish show up and the bite is good again. Other times, they aren't moving as much and you'll have to do the moving. In this case, I like to work my way down the shoreline. I'll make a cast, take a few steps, fish the cast again, then take a few more steps. In an area I expect to have fish, I'll move pretty slowly. If I'm fishing a new area or trying to locate fish, I'll cover water more quickly. This will let you find small holding spots that are invisible from the surface. Once you find a spot, remember it. Fish will likely be there again. Often, the difference between catching a shad and not is a matter of a couple of feet. Once you catch one, try to make the same cast again and work it in the same way, and there's a good chance you'll end up with another fish. Treat these fish with care. They have traveled thousands of miles and we want them to spawn and produce the next generation. Barbless hooks make releases quick and easy. Using a landing net will help you to shorten fights, land more fish, and return them to the river in better condition. When handling shad, be aware that they have sharp, bony ridges along their bellies. It's worth holding one for a picture now and then, but they will draw blood if they slip out of your hand while you're holding tightly. As the season moves on, fish will still be around, but you may have to work harder to find them. The Econlockhatchee River, known locally as the Econ, often holds fish until very late in the season and can be accessed on foot. If you don't find shad, at least you'll get to enjoy a nice hike. As the shad fishing starts to slow down with the warmer weather, other species are very active and happy to eat. Along with shad, you may catch black crappie, bluegill, red-breasted sunfish, largemouth bass, hybrid striped bass, bowfin, gar, and others. Many times I've gone out looking for shad late in the season and maybe caught one or two, maybe none at all, and I've still caught lots of fish and had a great day. Shad season is a favorite time of year for many of us in Central Florida. The weather is beautiful, the river is accessible and full of wildlife, and the fish fight well and are ready and willing to eat a fly. If you haven't yet given shad fishing a try, I hope you'll grab your 5-weight and a handful of flies, get an up-to-date fishing report, and head out on the river to see what you can find.